This podcast recording contains references to physical violence and sexual abuse. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, I am Dana Levenberg, member of the Assembly for the 95th District of New York State. Welcome to my new podcast series, Building Healthy Communities. My mission as a legislator is to build healthy communities in every sense of the word: environmentally healthy, economically healthy, physically and mentally healthy, all through the lens of equity. In this podcast series, I will be talking with the leaders, advocates, and others who are helping to build healthy communities here in the 95th District and beyond. Along the way, we will share information and education and resources for local residents that is really news that you can use. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And to kick off this podcast series, I have CarlLa Horton with me here today. CarlLa is Executive Director of Hope's Door, a local organization which seeks to end domestic violence and empower victims to achieve safety, independence, and healing from the trauma of abuse. Hope's Door operates 24/7, 365 days a year, a hotline. So if you are ever in need of assistance or know somebody that is, call 888-438-8700 or visit www.hopesdoorny.org. Welcome, CarlLa. I am so happy to have you here. Sorry that you're the guinea pig, but I think that it's really wonderful that we're kicking off this series with you. You have been such a tremendous advocate and help for so many women throughout this area, and really want to just get to know you a little bit better and have you have the opportunity to talk more about Hope's Door and all the good work that you're doing and on the resources that are available. So to get started, let me know what inspired you to join this organization, to build this organization, and to get to where we are today.
Well, it's a easy response to that. I grew up in a home with a father who beat my mother on almost a daily basis throughout our childhood. It was horrific, and I sometimes think the only thing worse than the abuse, and there was physical and sexual abuse of our mother, there was sexual misconduct with myself and one of my two sisters. And if you kind of look back and then you get to look forward, when I look back, all I can think is there were no hotlines, there weren't shelters. The police at that time had an intervention that kind of began and ended with taking my dad for a walk around the block. Now, we have come a long way since then.
Absolutely.
We've come a long way, and yet there's still so much further to go. So you're right. The hotline is the gateway to all of our services. Whatever Hope's Door has to offer begins with someone finding deep within themselves the absolute courage that it takes to just pick up the phone and to make that call. And if you're out there and you're living in a situation that is horrific, and it doesn't have to be physical abuse, it doesn't have to be sexual abuse. We know that some of the worst abuse is emotional and verbal. I was at my mother's bedside when she died about 8 years ago, and she was a victim of child sex abuse. She was literally pimped out by her own mother and then was abused by my father. But she never talked about the physical abuse. On her hospital bed in her last days and hours, she was cycling the things that were said to her. Not what was done to her, but what was said to her. So when we talk about abuse, we need to think about the absolute trauma that being berated on a daily basis, the trauma that can induce and last for a lifetime. We can talk about isolation when people say, well, What are the warning signs of abuse?
Mm.
Isolation. Does this person who's supposed to love you allow you the very autonomy that they demand for themselves? And I will say this, well, 90-some% of the adult victims that we serve are indeed women. This is a crime based in patriarchy, in male dominance, in suppression of women. At Hope Store, we've been serving the whole gamut of victims who need to evolve into survivors. We were the first domestic violence agency I know that admitted an adult male victim of abuse back about, 2002, I think, and probably 15 years before the state mandated equal opportunity for shelter services. So we serve women and children primarily in our shelter, but we've had gay and straight, transgender. What we say is that Hope Store is open to all. And if there's anything we can do to help and support you on your journey from victim to survivor, we'll work with you as best we can with whatever barriers that you might individually have.
Are there other, you talked a little bit about misconceptions to a certain extent in terms of it's not just physical abuse. You talked about isolation, you talked about berating. Are there other misconceptions about what really qualifies as domestic abuse, do you think? Or do you think
Let's
you've
look at
covered
it
it?
this way. It's all about power and control. Controlling what you do, what you say, where you go, who your friends are, who you can meet with. So isolation, we say, is the first real red flag. But there are others. Let's talk about economic abuse. People
Mm.
who are not allowed to work because, God forbid, they have the financial independence to make it on their own.
Mm.
Or how about you can go to work, but you'll give me your check, which will go in some account that I have the sole access to.
Mm.
So you'll find that about 95% of domestic violence victims are subjected to economic abuse. 1 in 20, 25% are subjected to reproductive sabotage. And that can be everything from switching out your birth control pills, stealthing with removal of a condom. It can be saying that you're going to use a condom and then you don't, because having a baby is another way to tie someone to you for the next 18 years, potentially.
Yeah.
So you could talk about physical abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse. All of it, though, tends to wrap together because what happens is escalation. If just the verbal abuse keeps you in line, dominated by someone with an insatiable need to have this power and control for reasons I cannot begin to understand or explain. If that works, maybe it doesn't escalate. But maybe you decide that you want to go see your mom at Christmas or for Hanukkah. Maybe you want to do something they don't want you to do. When you start to assert your autonomy, your God-given right, if I would say, to that sort of self-determination, then it ups the ante, because then the verbal becomes more verbal. The physical might start with a little trip, oh, I didn't mean to do that, or a little shove, well, you yanked my chain, pulled my buttons, whatever, they might say. But in the end, I'm going to say this. Abuse is always, always the fault of the abuser. There is nothing anyone does that should end up with someone else invading your physical, mental, sexual space. And we work with a lot of victims, and we hear things like, well, I thought I had to do whatever he wanted sexually because we're married. Indeed, there was hundreds of years when your physical self was indeed, one could say, the property of a husband, and there was no such thing as a marital rape. But we've had that law in New York State now for decades. But we still will work with some people who say, well, I thought I had to do what he said.
Mhm.
I thought he got to control the money. He told me he's the one who wears the pants in the family. There are cultural barriers. I mean, you think about how hard it is for someone who comes to us who's got financial resources somewhere, even if she can't access them. But maybe this person also is an immigrant, an undocumented immigrant, someone who doesn't speak English. So there are kind of umbrella abuses that are so commonly, used to control that you'd almost think there was a class somewhere that they all took because they have so much in common. And yet each and every individual has unique barriers to themselves. Those might be cultural, they might be linguistic, they might just be their own innate self. So what we do at Hope Store is we just meet people where they are.
Mhm.
If you come to us, we will not tell you what to do. You've had power and control over you for a very long time.
Mhm.
We're not going to replace an abuser's power and control with our own. But we are going to work complexly and deeply and openly and transparently to
Mhm.
say what is happening to you. Not what did you do to cause this. We don't blame a victim. What happened to you? How
Mhm.
did that make you feel? How might we help you heal from that trauma, be it emotional, sexual, physical? How
So,
can we help?
yeah, so can you talk a little bit more about one thing you talked about was courage, and obviously somebody needs the courage to even take that first step to admit that they maybe could use some help, that they maybe are in a situation that they need to,
They know something's not right, but they
right,
don't have the words sometimes
right,
or the ability to step outside. Um,
right.
So what we say is, not only are we here for you, but I think it's important for any of the listeners, the viewers of this podcast, to know that they could be extraordinarily helpful. For example, maybe the victim does not have it in themselves just yet.
Hmm.
Just yet. They know something's wrong. They know this isn't right. They've dealt with it. They've tried to make things better. But then we'll find that people will say, but I don't want my kids seeing this. I don't want my sons to think that this is the way a husband and a father should act. I don't want my daughters to grow up to think that this is how they should be treated. So what we find is when you're in a situation you may not really see out of it, you have been so mentally and emotionally and physically beaten down. But you have friends. You have people listening, right? And they have friends and neighbors and coworkers and people at their church or temple or mosque, and they think something must be wrong too.
Hmm.
So don't just be in this audience and say, oh, well, I'm so lucky. I don't need the help of Hope Store. I want you to write down our hotline number,
Hmm. Hmm.
888-438-8700, because you have it within you to maybe help a friend or a neighbor. And what you want to remember more than anything is that the most dangerous time for a domestic violence victim is when she intends to leave or has done so.
Hmm.
So you don't ever want to say, just leave him, without saying, before you think of leaving him, I want you to call Hope Store.
Hmm.
They will help you plan for your safety to maximize your safety. Maybe you'll need to go into shelter. Maybe you'll need help fleeing the state. Maybe you need our lawyers, one of our lawyers, bilingual by the way. Maybe you'll need one of our lawyers to go to court with you to get an order of protection. And if you got an order of protection in Westchester County in New York State, that order is valid in every other state in the country.
Hmm.
So you're going to want to make decisions about what your legal rights are, on top of what your rights for safety and autonomy in your own self are, and the safety of your children. So
That sounds so complicated. Can you talk, we'll talk a little bit more about all of your services and sort of, maybe step by step. You started a little bit, so, how can a friend help or give guidance to somebody when they're at that critical point of maybe leaving and walking out the door? So what other services besides legal services and shelter do you provide?
Well, let's just start with a hotline call. First,
Mm-hmm.
you call the hotline. Maybe you call with a friend holding your hand while you do it. Maybe you sneak out on a lunch hour to make a private call on your own. So you call the hotline, and the first thing that we're going to do is go through some initial what we call safety planning and danger assessment. I'll get into that more later. And then we're going to try to elicit just what's going on, what
Mm-hmm.
isn't right, help that person understand that none of this is their fault. And then we try to find out, what is it that you want? What do you think you might need? Let me tell you about some of the services we offer. So we can start with just shelter. Do you need to get out of there right away? And what are some of the factors that make you more at risk for harm or lethality? Does this person have access to a weapon? Has he lost a job, unemployed? Is he constantly stalking and following you and checking up on you? And another one that's a high risk factor, do you have children in that home that are not his? That is another high risk indicator. So we'll do that initial safety planning and danger assessment to try to get a sense of just where this person is and what they might need. And then we start letting them know about the available services. Yes, we have counseling for adults and children. We were the first, again, domestic violence agency I know that had a men's support group for male victims of abuse. Perhaps a smaller percentage of those we served, but one of them got hit in the head with a Christmas snow globe um, and was severely damaged as a result. So we try to elicit. We don't assume that if a woman's calling that she's talking about a heterosexual partner, because it could be a lesbian partner that is causing harm. So we'll talk about the counseling and the support groups, and then we'll talk about the legal services. So someone who might be able to go with you when you petition for an order of protection, follow up with follow-up court cases having to do with child custody, support, visitation, all the different things, perhaps as up to and including divorce. Maybe you've been run into the financial hole with financial abuse, opening credit cards in your name, buying things with no intention to pay. Maybe you're having trouble with the landlord who wants to evict you because your partner's causing so much trouble. So those are kind of like the basic three things. You can come for shelter, counseling and support group for the emotional support, the safety planning, the danger assessment, and then the legal services. When all those initial crisis things, because they are happening very quickly generally,
Sure.
then we have the Next Step Economic Empowerment Program. I mentioned earlier that so many victims have been subjected to financial abuse and control. So we have people who, once they've come to us and they've kind of moved a little bit on, it's kind of the key danger aspects have been addressed, continuingly need to be addressed, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But we talk about the Next Step program, and with survivors who have a need for the ability to earn a living that
Sure.
allows them to support themselves and perhaps their children.
Mm-hmm.
So we have what we call a Next Step Economic Empowerment Specialist, works with that survivor to say, well, what are your problems? What are your barriers to being financially independent? And we can have someone who's illiterate in the home country language as well as not being literate in English, right up to people who come to us who are ready for college and just need help. So
Mm-hmm.
what we have is we have the Next Step Fund for clients who have worked with us, survivors who have worked with us, who are ready and safe enough and healed enough to get out there. We help them access educational programs. This past week, we've paid tuition for a nursing program
Mm-hmm.
and for a pharmacy technician.
Wonderful.
Some of the things we pay for are minor. Those are more major things. But we had one survivor, she got a no cost to her vocational training program in the healthcare industry. She got her scrubs, she got everything, but she didn't have 1 week of child care. That wasn't covered. $90. That's all we had to pay, and that was her last barrier. Someone else, again, healthcare jobs where there's lots of $90 pair of shoes, exact same amount. And
Wow.
that regulation pair of shoes was
Mhm.
the only barrier she had. Now, again,
So, just out of curiosity, I mean, I have to assume that there's no charge for these services
oh
when
my
people
God,
come
I'm
to you.
sorry.
So that's okay. When people
We
come to you, it's
we
all, yeah,
don't charge for anything.
right.
Our services are free and confidential. If
Absolutely.
you come to us, there is no cost for anything we offer. And indeed, we sign off under federal regulations. We are prohibited. So not only don't we can't. We are here to help.
Right.
Um,
And nobody knows where you shelter people, right? Like, I mean, everything's very, um, again,
well, our public
secretive.
offices are known.
Right. Sure.
They're listed, but our shelter is in a confidential location, and we have
Yeah.
security protocols that we work to protect the safety and privacy of anyone who goes there. And we ask them who come to us as well to keep our confidential location. Now, those are the what I call the first pillar, if you would, of Hope Store work. That is the comprehensive services available to survivors. But we also, according to our mission, must work on prevention. So we have the Love Shouldn't Hurt program. Can I share that with you now?
Absolutely. Please.
Okay, well, I started Love Shouldn't Hurt over 20 years ago because
Say it again. Love, what is it?
love should not
Oh, love should not hurt. Got it. Okay.
hurt.
Got
And
it.
it came about because I saw some national statistics that 1 in 4 girls would be physically or sexually abused before high school graduation. That was horrifying. So we looked into the matter, and then we actually collaborated with the Junior League of Northern Westchester, which actually was our parent organization before we spun off privately. And we put together a program that should have three components. The first is classroom workshops. Our youth educators go into middle schools and high schools and youth-based organizations, and they do a workshop. And in this workshop, they talk about this is what a good relationship looks like based on equality, respect, and trust. Contrast that, this is an abusive relationship based on power and control. And then we start an interactive situation there in the classroom or in the community organization with those young people, really trying to change the social norms that allow abuse to not only continue but to flourish. So what we've done is we established baseline data when we first started and worked with young people. We learned that 1 in 4 victims of teen dating abuse, only 1 in 4 would tell a parent, 1 in 4 told nobody, but 62% would tell a friend. So we based our program on that evidence and said, well, people are going to be talking to their friends and their peers. Let's make sure they're giving them good advice. So knowing that a one-shot deal in a classroom while opening the door doesn't really result in the outcomes that we need to protect girls, which was our focus at that time, from abuse. Now called Students Talking About Relationships. We just kind of modeled it on Students Against Drunk Driving, to be fair and honest. And what we do is in those workshops, we try to elicit and recruit young people who want to join this peer leadership group so that they can work in their schools and communities all year round. And that's the basis of true prevention, something that is multi-tiered for the different segments of the community, something that lasts and is supported over time. So we have STAR chapters in schools around the county, and they do programming throughout the year.
Wonderful.
To raise awareness, learn how to intervene more safely, know what the resources are for survivors. The third
Are you seeing any results from that particularly?
Yeah, so let me
That
see if I
program?
could pull that data out of my head.
Yeah.
Um, Remember I told you that 1 in 4 told nobody?
Yes.
Well, that number has increased. I don't remember the number, but the 1 in 4, 25% who would tell a parent, that has now grown to around 41, 42%.
That's
And
great.
those who would tell a friend has grown from that 60, early 60, low 60% is now in the low 80%.
Oh, that's great.
So we are breaking the silence,
Yep.
helping young people break the silence. And it's silence and shame,
Mm.
buttressed by fear, understandable fear, that allows abuse to continue. So breaking the silence, yeah. Every time we update against our baseline data, we find.
Would you say like so much of that silence is just because people just don't know, or they think, oh, this is how it's supposed to be, whether it's from media or, where does that come from, that the shame and the silence from when you are the victim?
Well, let's talk. We were talking about young people. And
Yes,
the barriers to breaking the silence for young people, you can imagine, think about it, would be different from you or I breaking the silence if
sure.
we were in this
Yes,
situation. For a young person is, I want to be grown up.
right.
I want to, I want to, I want to have a relationship. I have the
Hmm.
peer pressure to have a relationship. I gained status by having a relationship, and I want to be grown up. Now, if I break the silence and my parents find out, then they'll shut this down. I'll lose my relationship. I'll lose perhaps my status.
Hmm.
And so I want to be seen as a grown up. So I'm going to grown up handle this on my own. Now, of
Hmm.
course, we know grown ups can't handle this on their
Sure.
own. They
Yeah,
should not have to. And we're here to help. So those barriers are very different for a teen.
sure.
But then you talk about adult female victims, where the societal pressure to maintain a family and a home, to have
Yep.
a father for your children. I once had a victim whose husband was quite wealthy telling me at one time, I am not leaving him and subjecting my children to what would happen as a result. We'd get nothing, and my children are not going to suffer the loss of ballet lessons, equestrian lessons, and good college educations because I made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
That was her barrier.
Hmm.
Now, it took her 3 years till she came back and said, we will live in a one-room studio
Hmm.
before we take and live another day. So the shame is so misplaced, of course. It's
Yes.
amazing to me how for year after year, abusers seem to have no shame, and yet their victims do. But we know our society, right? It holds women responsible for their own safety. It holds women responsible for holding a family together. You have cultural pressures, and I've heard this from so many different cultures. I don't know why they think it's unique to them. But
Sure.
in my family, in my culture, in my
Hmm.
faith, we don't have divorce. And I've heard that from Jewish women, Muslim women, Roman Catholic women,
Yeah.
evangelical women, right? So they're all kind of doing this thing where they have these expectations of what society says women should do, and society blames them. They
Right.
blame them for domestic violence. They blame them for sexual assault.
Hmm.
What were you wearing? What were you doing? What did you do that made him do? It's absolute craziness when you
Yeah.
think about it. But when you're in the middle of it, you have all kinds of misplaced shame, and then you have very real fear.
Yeah.
What will he do if I leave him? What will he do to me, to the
Absolutely.
children, to my
Right.
parents, to the dog, to Fluffy the cat?
Hmm.
Because he's threatened what he's going to do. He's told you what he's going to do. Or if he hasn't been specific, he said, you'll be sorry.
Hmm.
And then what do you make of that?
Yeah.
About 20 years ago, I finally, and I was not blaming her at all, I finally asked my mother a question about why. Why, Mommy, can you tell me why you didn't leave Daddy all those years ago? He actually ended up dying when I was 14. She never left. But I asked her, can you tell me why? I wanted to understand. And she said, well, he told me that if I ever left him, I'd never see my children again. And I said, well, Mommy, how did you interpret that? And her answer was this. Well, I didn't know if that meant he'd divorce me and gain custody, or if he would kill all of you and bury you, and I would never even know where to find your grave. And I am sitting on my couch with my feet up on my coffee table, right? And you think you've heard it all. I had been in the job for years, but I had yet to hear a mother say, I wouldn't even know where to find your graves. And he was very, very devious. And the thing about the divorce and losing custody, like, how could she lose custody? He paid men to make passes at her, to catch her in the act of cheating, which back in the 50s and early 60s, when I was a child, would have been enough, right? We know this for a fact because one of those men came and gave her the money.
Wow.
And told her what was going on.
Wow.
How evil, right?
Yes.
And here's the thing I need to say as well. My father was so handsome, so well dressed, just so good looking, and could not do a thing, just couldn't do a thing for you, just was always there for you. So the neighbors, the families, the friends, they they absolutely could not believe my mother because this Jekyll and Hyde thing is so prevalent. Not every abuser, some don't mind beating the wife up in the middle of a restaurant, but so many, like what I grew up with,
Are
able to hide in plain sight, and only their wives and their children and their stepchildren, who I believe are sadly so ill-positioned for their own safety.
Sure.
So what you've got to say to yourself when you're thinking about this is believe women when they tell you stories.
Absolutely.
Because the stories yet are, I know in my heart and in my life to be true, are so horrific.
Absolutely.
But here's our motto. I'm going to tell you the Hope Store motto. Home is where you should feel safe and protected. Hope Store. That's who you call if you're not.
Thank you so much.
You don't have to go through this alone. You're not alone. We are standing by. We have counselors and advocates and youth educators and lawyers and bilingual staff. We can offer you help, of course, in English, but also Spanish, Urdu, Hindi, Punjabi, Creole, all currently on staff. And if we have a language that, we don't have a language, we have ways to access the services that we need.
Amazing. Thank you so much, CarlLa, for sharing all of this very important, critical information, sharing your own story, and just, really pouring out your heart a little bit to all of the viewers today. I just want to also say that for anyone listening or watching this podcast before October 27th, my office is collecting items for a Domestic Violence Awareness Month drive, which will benefit Hope's Door. So if you are able to contribute, suggested items for donation include full-size toiletries and gift cards for establishments such as Amazon, grocery stores, gas stations, drugstores, essentially items that survivors can use to meet their immediate needs as they are trying to reestablish their lives. And you can bring or mail them to my district office at 8 Revolutionary Road in Ossining, New York at 10562, or bring them to our mobile office hours, which are posted on my Assembly webpage and on my social media profiles. So again, CarlLa, thank you so much for taking the time today. Again, being part of the very first launch of Building Healthy Communities podcast. Until next time, everybody, please be safe and healthy, and we'll see you around the 95th Assembly District. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Dana, so very much.